A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corns, we've done some episodes talking about SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and SNRIs, selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. And really fantastic drugs, I think, that have improved the lives of so many people. And which, as I always say, you never hear from, generally, folks like me. I just happen to be motivated to send in all these weird questions to you. But I think most people who have good experiences on these drugs just kind of vanish into the ether, and we only hear on social networking from the people who have the horror stories. Ironically, one of the things that kept me from trying an SSRI for years, I was petrified of the idea of something called brain zaps. For those who haven't heard, this is this electric shock-like phenomenon that you're supposed to, some people report when they're tapering off an SSRI. And I find it kind of ironic that for the amount of time I spent worrying about what it would feel like, that sounds terrifying, your brain feeling like it's shocked. When I came off Lexapro for the first time, nothing happened basically. I mean, that's not true. I did feel pretty sick actually. I recall nausea more than anything else, and definitely feeling a bit fluish and under the weather, but didn't get any brain zaps. So it's funny how the legend often really can be actually a real source of resistance to these meds. I think that's a problem in its own right. But what I'd love to talk about today, Herman and Corn, is the long process that it takes for these drugs to work. We know that SSRIs, you come onto them slowly, and they're tapered off slowly. And I recall reading some fascinating research which showed that the increase in serotonin levels, which you can measure in the research setting, using brain imaging, very advanced functional MRIs, actually happens pretty much instantaneously. You literally take your first dose of Prozac or Lexapro, and the serotonin levels are increasing, but the benefits take weeks to accrue. So that's the first question that I have, is this fascinating process of re-architecture and neuroplasticity. Why does it work like this? What are the theories as to how that actually happens? And likewise, when your brain is going back, is it the case that just like all the progress, all that stability, all those new brain networks that were developed, does it just like unsponge itself? That's the other part that I'm always interested in when people talk about SSRIs. They're scared about being on them indefinitely, and I'll try not to mesh too many questions here. But when we talk about the effects of SSRIs building up, serotonin exists outside of the brain as well. So I'm always curious for SRIs and SNRIs, about which I have the same question, how that works. Like, if they're having these effects outside of the brain, what are those potentially? And is there some risk of accumulation? But the more important question I'd love to talk about in today's episode is, what do we do? What does the medical system do at the moment when someone comes in who's in a severe state of depression and they haven't had that conversation with their doctor about wanting to get on an SSRI from a point of wanting to get better? They've reached a profound state of crisis, and now they might be, self-harming or suicidal or whatever you can imagine. And you can't tell a person like that, here's a prescription for Lexapro, take it every day, come back, make an appointment in a month, and hopefully you'll be feeling a bit better. But besides steps to maybe reduce self-harm, and I can't speak from any experience here, but I know that there are, protective mechanisms in different systems for that. Is there anything that can be done for those individuals where we have drugs like ketamine and those that maybe have a quick acting effect that could bridge some of that anguish and suffering to stabilize a person while they're waiting for the long-acting drug to kick in? Herman and Corn, let's talk about one of the properties of SSRIs that is interesting, but I can imagine presents its own challenge in the context of care, which is the long lead-in period. If we use our supply chain analogy, which we frequently talk about, it's like waiting for something great on AliExpress. The lead time is a long time. That was probably a totally inept and bad analogy, but there you go. I sometimes make some of my own. Herman and Corin has talked about SSRIs and the onset period in today's episode of My Word Prompts.
Well, here we are again. Another deep dive into the human brain, and today we are looking at one of the most frustrating wait times in modern medicine. You know, we live in an era of instant gratification. You can order a meal and have it at your door in 20 minutes. You can stream any movie ever made in seconds. You can get an answer from an artificial intelligence in a heartbeat. But when it comes to treating one of the most debilitating conditions a person can face, clinical depression, we are still stuck in this weird biological slow lane. It is February 25th, 26, and despite all our technological leaps, the brain still insists on taking its sweet time to heal.
It is a profound paradox, Corn. And honestly, it is one of the most fascinating puzzles in neurobiology. Herman Poppleberry here, by the way, ready to get into the weeds. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly this. He is asking about the lag time for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs and SNRIs. Daniel pointed out something that really gets to the heart of the matter. These drugs change your brain chemistry almost immediately, yet the patient does not feel better for weeks. Why the wait? It is like the brain is receiving the message, but refusing to open the envelope for a month.
It is such a good question because it feels like a hardware-software mismatch. If I put more oil in a car, the engine runs smoother right away. If I take an aspirin for a headache, the pain starts to dull in 20 minutes. But with these medications, the oil is there, the levels are up, but the engine is still sputtering for a month. Daniel also mentioned his own experience with brain zaps and the fear surrounding tapering off these meds, which I think is a huge part of the conversation. And then there is the crisis element. What do you do when someone is in a severe depressive state right now and cannot wait for a 3-week lead time? We are talking about a gap where lives are literally on the line.
It is a high-stakes waiting game. To understand why it takes so long, we have to move past the old-school idea of the chemical imbalance. For a long time, the public narrative, largely driven by pharmaceutical marketing in the late 1980s and 90s, was that depression is just a lack of serotonin. You have a low tank, you add some serotonin via a pill, and you are good to go. But if that were true, people would feel better within hours of their first dose of Prozac or Zoloft. We know from imaging and blood work that these drugs start blocking the reuptake of serotonin within hours. The levels in the synaptic cleft, that tiny gap between neurons, spike almost instantly.
So the chemical imbalance theory, at least in its simplest form, does not really hold up to the timeline. If the chemistry is fixed on day 1, but the mood does not lift until day 21, something else must be happening. What is the brain doing during those 3 weeks? Is it just being stubborn? Or is there a legitimate construction project going on under the hood?
It is very much a construction project. We are moving away from the chemical imbalance model and toward the neuroplasticity hypothesis. Think about it this way. Chronic depression is not just a chemical state, it is a physical state of the brain. When someone is depressed for a long time, certain parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, which is involved in mood, memory, and emotional regulation, can actually see a reduction in volume. The neurons themselves lose their complexity. They have these branches called dendrites that reach out to connect with other neurons, and in a depressed state, those branches can wither or retract. It is like a tree losing its leaves and its smaller twigs during a long, harsh winter.
That is a heavy thought. The brain is actually physically changing under the weight of the condition. It is shrinking in places. So, are you saying the medication acts more like a fertilizer than a simple light switch?
That is exactly the right analogy. The increase in serotonin is just the first domino. When those serotonin levels stay high consistently, it triggers a cascade of genetic and cellular events. One of the most important players here is a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. You can think of BDNF as a growth hormone or a high-grade fertilizer for your brain cells. High levels of serotonin eventually signal the brain to start producing more BDNF, and once that protein is flowing, it starts the hard work of repairing and growing those neural connections. It helps the neurons grow new branches and form new synapses. That physical rebuilding process takes time. You cannot regrow a forest in an afternoon, no matter how much fertilizer you use. You have to wait for the cellular machinery to actually build the proteins and extend the membranes.
So the 3-week lag is actually the time it takes for the brain to physically rebuild itself into a more resilient shape. It is the time required for structural architecture. But I have also heard about something called receptor downregulation. Is that part of the delay too? It sounds like the brain is actually fighting the medicine at first.
Yes, and that is where the biology gets really clever and a bit stubborn. The brain loves homeostasis. It wants to keep things exactly where they are, even if that state is miserable. When you suddenly flood the system with serotonin by blocking its reuptake, the receiving neurons are like, whoa, this is way too much noise. So they actually hide their receptors. They pull them back from the surface of the cell to dampen the signal. This is called downregulation.
It is like the brain is putting on noise, canceling headphones because the serotonin volume just got cranked to 10.
Precisely. And there are also these things called autoreceptors, specifically the 5-HT1A receptors on the sending neuron. Their job is to monitor how much serotonin is in the gap. If they sense a lot, they tell the neuron to stop sending more. It is a negative feedback loop. So, in the beginning, the drug is trying to increase serotonin, but the brain's own internal sensors are actively fighting back to keep levels low. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks of constant pressure from the medication for those autoreceptors to basically give up or desensitize. Once they stop putting on the brakes, the system finally settles into a new, higher level of activity. That is usually when the patient starts to feel the therapeutic lift. The headphones come off, the brakes are released, and the BDNF fertilizer starts doing its work.
It sounds like a constant negotiation between the medication and the brain's internal security system. But what about the other side of the coin that Daniel mentioned? Tapering off. This is a huge source of anxiety for people. If the brain has spent months or years rebuilding itself around this medication, what happens when you take the medication away? Does the brain just revert back to the old depressed architecture? Does the forest just wither away again?
That is the big fear, and it is why tapering is so critical. The brain has adapted to the presence of the drug. It has changed the number of receptors. It has changed the way it produces its own neurotransmitters. It has built a new equilibrium. If you stop abruptly, you leave the brain in a lurch. It is expecting that extra serotonin, and suddenly it is gone, but the receptors have not had time to grow back or become sensitive again. That is often where those brain zaps Daniel mentioned come from. They are thought to be a result of sudden shifts in neuronal activity, possibly involving the vestibular system or a temporary imbalance between excitatory and inhibitory signals, as the brain tries to recalibrate without its chemical crutch.
And to Daniel's point about whether the progress is lost, the hope is that the neuroplasticity, the actual physical growth of those neural branches, stays. The medication helped build the bridge, and even if you stop the medication, the bridge is still a physical structure in your brain. However, if the underlying stresses or biological vulnerabilities that caused the depression in the first place are still there, the brain might eventually start to prune those connections back again. It is not necessarily a permanent fix, but it is a structural improvement that gives you a better starting point. Think of it like physical therapy. You use the brace to help the bone heal, and once the bone is strong, you can take the brace off, but you still have to do the exercises to keep the muscles around it strong.
Right, and that is why therapy is often paired with these meds. The meds provide the structural capacity for change, the neuroplasticity, and the therapy helps the person build the habits and thought patterns that keep those connections healthy. It is a long-term project. You are essentially using the medication to open a window of plasticity where you can actually learn new ways of being.
Herman, are you there? It is your mother.
Mum, I am actually in the middle of a recording right now. I am on the show with Korn. We are in the middle of a very deep explanation of synaptic gaps.
Oh, hello, Corn. Herman, I am so sorry to bother you, but I was just at the market and I saw those nice organic oranges you like, the ones with the thin skin. Do you want me to pick some up for you? And did you remember to call the man about the leaky faucet in the bathroom? You cannot just leave it dripping, Bubbler. It is a waste of water, and it will stain the porcelain.
Mum, yes, the faucet is fine. I have a bucket under it. I will call you back in 20 minutes, okay? We are talking about brain chemistry and the enteric nervous system right now.
Brain chemistry? Such a smart boy. Always with the big words. Okay, I will leave you to your science. Just do not forget the faucet and eat a salad. Love you.
Love you too, Mum. Goodbye.
Hi, Dorothy. Sorry, Herman, I could not resist. It is nice to know that even when you are explaining the complexities of neurotrophic factors, your mom is still worried about your plumbing and your vitamin C intake. It is a very grounding influence.
Honestly, it is a good reminder that there is a world outside the lab. But back to Daniel's question about the rest of the body. This is a really sophisticated point he raised. Serotonin is not just a brain chemical. In fact, about 95% of the serotonin in your body is produced in your gut by cells called enterochromaffin cells.
95%? That is a massive amount. Why is it all down there if it is so famous for being a mood regulator? It feels like we have been looking at the wrong end of the body this whole time.
It is a busy molecule with many jobs. In the gut, serotonin regulates digestion, bowel movements, and even helps signal nausea. It is the primary communicator for the enteric nervous system, which people often call the second brain. It is also found in your blood platelets, where it helps with clotting and wound healing. It is everywhere. Now, when you take an SSRI, it does not just stay in your brain, it travels through your entire bloodstream. This means it is also blocking the reuptake of serotonin in your gut and your blood vessels.
So that explains the side effects. When people start these meds and they feel nauseous or have an upset stomach, that is literally because the drug is messing with the serotonin levels in their digestive tract. It is not all in their head.
The gut neurons are being flooded with serotonin just like the brain neurons are. The difference is that the gut does not usually need 3 weeks to react. The gut receptors respond immediately. That is why the side effects often hit on day 1, while the benefits take 3 weeks. It is a cruel irony of the biology. You get the stomachache and the jitters immediately, and you have to wait for the happiness.
Daniel asked about the risks of accumulation in the rest of the body. Is there a danger of having too much serotonin floating around? We hear about things like serotonin syndrome, but how common is that really?
There is a condition called serotonin syndrome, which is very serious, but it almost never happens from taking a standard dose of a single medication. It usually occurs when someone combines 2 different drugs that both increase serotonin, like taking an SSRI along with a certain type of migraine medication called a triptan, or an herbal supplement like St. John's wort. If levels get too high, you get hit with high blood pressure, rapid heart rate, tremors, and confusion. It is a medical emergency. But for most people on a stable dose, the body is pretty good at managing the peripheral serotonin. The main risk is just those annoying side effects like gastrointestinal issues or, in some cases, changes in bone density over very long periods of time. Serotonin actually plays a role in bone metabolism, and researchers are still looking into how long-term SSRI use might affect fracture risk in older adults. There is also a slight increase in the risk of gastrointestinal bleeding, especially if you take them with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, because serotonin is so vital for platelet function.
It is fascinating how we have labeled serotonin as the feel-good chemical when it is actually more like a universal signaling system for the whole body. It is like a master coordinator. But I want to pivot to the last part of Daniel's prompt, which is the most urgent part, the crisis gap. If you are in a severe depressive state, if you are feeling suicidal or unable to function, telling someone to wait 3 weeks for their Zoloft to kick in feels like a death sentence. How does the medical system bridge that gap? We cannot just tell someone in a burning building to wait for the rain to start in 20 days.
This is the frontier of psychiatry right now. For decades, we really did not have a good answer. We would hospitalize people to keep them safe while the meds ramped up, but we did not have a way to flip the switch faster. That has changed with the rise of rapid-acting antidepressants, specifically ketamine and its derivative, esketamine, which was approved as a nasal spray called Spravato.
Ketamine has such a wild reputation. People know it as an anesthetic for horses or a club drug, but now it is being used in clinics for treatment-resistant depression. How does it work differently than an SSRI? Why is it so much faster?
It targets a completely different system. While SSRIs work on serotonin, ketamine works on glutamate, which is the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. Glutamate is like the master switch for brain activity. Ketamine blocks a specific receptor called the NMDA receptor. This blockage causes a sudden surge of glutamate in other parts of the synapse, which almost immediately triggers the release of those growth factors we talked about earlier, like BDNF.
So it bypasses the 3-week negotiation with the serotonin receptors and goes straight to the rebuilding phase. It is like calling in a helicopter to drop the fertilizer instead of waiting for the truck to drive through the mud.
Precisely. It is like a jumpstart for neuroplasticity. Instead of waiting weeks for the system to slowly ramp up BDNF production through the serotonin pathway, ketamine can trigger a massive release within hours. It also works on the AMPA receptors, which help strengthen the connections between neurons almost instantly. People often report feeling a significant lift in their mood and a reduction in suicidal ideation within 24 hours of a single treatment. It is a profound shift in how we think about psychiatric intervention.
That is incredible. So, why isn't everyone just taking ketamine instead of SSRIs? If it is faster and more direct, why deal with the 3-week wait at all?
Well, there are a few reasons. First, the effect of ketamine is often temporary. It provides that immediate bridge, but for many people, the effect might only last for a week or two. That is why it is often used as a stabilizer, while the long-term meds, like SSRIs, have time to start working. Second, it has significant side effects during the treatment itself, like dissociation, where you feel detached from your body, or hallucinations. Because of this, it has to be administered in a controlled clinical setting where you can be monitored. You cannot just take a ketamine pill at home every morning before work. And finally, we are still learning about the long-term effects of frequent ketamine use. There are concerns about bladder issues and potential cognitive effects if used too often. But as a tool for acute crisis, it is a game changer. It is the emergency brake for a mental health crisis.
It seems like we are moving toward a tiered approach. If someone is in a moderate state, you start the long-term SSRI and wait for the slow build. If someone is in a severe crisis, you use something like ketamine or even electroconvulsive therapy, which is still one of the fastest ways to break a severe depressive episode, to get them through the immediate danger. We are also seeing new drugs like Auvelity, which combines dextromethorphan and bupropion to try and get faster results by targeting that glutamate system in a pill form.
And there is also research into other fast-acting compounds. There is a lot of buzz around psilocybin and other psychedelics for the same reason. They seem to induce a state of rapid neuroplasticity, allowing the brain to quickly form new, healthier connections. We are really entering a new era where the 3-week wait might eventually become a thing of the past. But for now, for the millions of people on standard antidepressants, that 3-week window is a period of intense vulnerability. It is a gap that requires a lot of support from doctors, family, and friends.
I think that is a really important point for listeners to hear. If you are in that first week or two of a new medication and you feel worse, or you feel nothing at all, it is not necessarily that the drug is failing. It is that your brain is currently in a high-level negotiation with the chemistry. The construction crews are on site. The BDNF is starting to flow, but they haven't finished the bridge yet. It is a physical process, and you have to give the biology time to catch up with the intent. You are literally waiting for your brain to grow.
It is a test of endurance, and Daniel's mention of the medical system's role is spot on. We need better monitoring during those first few weeks. Some doctors are now using things like sleep aids or anti-anxiety medications as a temporary measure to help patients get through the initial side effects and the agitation that can sometimes happen when you first start an SSRI. It is about layering the treatment to match the timeline of the brain's adaptation. We have to treat the person, not just the receptors.
You know, we talked about this a bit in episode 834, when we were looking at the chemistry of focus and dopamine. The brain is so sensitive to these shifts. Whether it is dopamine for ADHD or serotonin for depression, you are essentially trying to tune a biological instrument that is constantly trying to tune itself back. It is a dynamic system. It is not like fixing a leaky faucet. Sorry, Herman, where you just replace a washer and the dripping stops. It is more like trying to redirect a river. You have to build the new channel and wait for the water to erode the old path.
It really is. And to Daniel's question about whether the brain reverses its progress when you taper off, I think it is helpful to look at it through the lens of neuroadaptation. The brain is not a static object, it is a living, changing network. When you are on the medication, you are training the brain to operate in a certain way. If you taper slowly and carefully, and I mean very slowly, sometimes over many months, You are giving the brain a chance to learn how to maintain that stability on its own. It is like training wheels. You don't just kick them off while you are going down a steep hill. You gradually raise them until the rider has the balance to stay upright without them. The goal is for the structural changes, the new neural pathways, to be robust enough to survive without the chemical nudge.
I love that. And it highlights why the brain zap phenomenon is so unsettling. It is a sign that the training wheels were removed too fast and the brain is wobbling. It is a sensory manifestation of a system out of balance. Daniel, thank you for this prompt. It covers so much ground, from the cellular level to the systemic level of how we handle mental health crises. It reminds us that while the chemistry is complex, the goal is simple, giving people the structural support they need to heal.
It really does. It is a reminder that we are more than just a collection of chemicals. We are a complex, self-adjusting system that sometimes needs a little help to find its balance. And even though that help takes time to work, the physical changes it creates are a testament to the brain's incredible ability to heal and adapt. We are not stuck with the brain we have today. We are constantly in a state of becoming.
Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that if you are finding these deep dives helpful, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help the show grow and reach more people who might be navigating these exact issues. We appreciate the support more than we can say. It helps us keep the lights on and the research flowing.
And if you want to dig deeper into the archives, check out myweirdprompts.com. We have over 800 episodes there, including episode 445, where we talked about the science of tapering off medications like Seroquel and the specific challenges of antipsychotic withdrawal. It is a great companion. Listen to this discussion. We also have a lot of resources on the gut-brain axis if you want to learn more about those 95% of serotonin molecules living in your stomach.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. If you have a question or a prompt of your own, hit us up at show@myweirdprompts.com. We love hearing from you, whether it is a question about neurobiology or just a weird observation about the world.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn. We will see you next time. Keep asking the weird questions.
And call your mother.
Especially if the faucet is leaking. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth.